Welcome to this podcast of Sound Off from July 13th, 2020 with your host, Nate Laux. Nate's topic today is the returning to schools in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now here's your host, Pastor Nate Laux.
Hello, friends. This is Nate Laux. I am your host today for Sound Off, and we are going to talk some more about school reopening plans. If you were listening last Friday, we had as our guest Dr. Barbara Eason-Watkins, the superintendent from the Michigan City area schools, and she took us through some of the plans that they have to reopen Michigan City schools. We have tonight, LaPorte area schools, our LaPorte community school system, will be releasing and then releasing their plan to reopen schools. New Prairie has done their plans as well. I think there's a couple of them that's out there on their website. You can check those out. Some of the rural schools we looked into, and they don't necessarily all have their plans ready and published yet, but they're working on them. And so we'd love to hear from you. If you are a parent or a teacher or just a community member, if you've got an opinion on reopening or if you have a concern, I'd love to hear those as well. If you have a comment on it, as a parent, as maybe a guardian, what are you concerned about? What about as an educator or a staff member, maybe a bus driver? What are you concerned about? We'd love to hear about it today. Now, if you want to call in, you can call to 219-362-0522. You can also text that line if you don't feel like calling in. If you are like me, a millennial, and maybe you don't feel comfortable calling in and talking, you can always text our Liquor Vault on-air line at 219-362-0522, a comment, and if it is appropriate, we will definitely read it on air here. We do have a caller already, so we're going to take your call. Hello, welcome to Sound Off. Who are we talking to today?
Hi, good afternoon. I would like to comment on something that I heard last week on the plan to reopen.
Sure.
I don't understand the wearing the mask and not wearing the mask and not wearing mask in the cafeteria when restaurants are only at 25% capacity and they are space seating and cleaning continually. How can you put all those kids in a cafeteria like that unmasked?
Yeah. I think that's a legitimate concern, right? When you go into classrooms, and I think if we're listening to our educators and our administrators, one of the major concerns is our schools and our facilities weren't necessarily built for social distancing, right? You put 25 to 30 kids in a classroom, and it's not built to give everyone 6 feet of space.
Exactly.
Other spaces, kind of like the cafeteria and things like that. Certainly buses aren't built that way. And I think it's a legitimate question. So obviously, the question becomes, when do you wear a mask and when do you not? Most of the plans that I'm seeing have mask wearing when they are in the hallway and when they're in shared space, but they don't have mask wearing when they're in the classroom. And I think and
I don't understand that, the mask wearing on the bus and in the hallway, but not in the classroom and not in the cafeteria where the majority of the children will be seated.
Yeah. And we're working
more than 25% capacity.
And I think to be honest, as a parent, it's a question I have as well. And I think it's a very real one that hopefully the school systems and the administrators and the health department and these kind of things will address going down the road. So thank you so much.
I'm hoping that by the opening date that they do have the best interest of the children at heart.
Yeah.
And their staff members.
So real quick, are you there? What do you think should happen? Do you think they should do did she leave me? Oh, okay. We've got another caller, do we? No? Okay. The text lines are open. The phone lines are open. Give us a text. Give us a call, 219-362-0522. We'd love to hear from you.
If you don't mind, Nate, I'll just come in real quick, let you know. I can speak at least what I've been hearing at New Prairie, for example, and her question was for lunches, the cafeteria. Sure. Stagger. They will be staggering all the classrooms, only so many kids. So kids that maybe had lunch at one time at 10:30 in the morning, maybe even earlier, maybe even later, but they won't have everybody in there, if that makes sense. They're going to stagger the cafeteria.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of that, the plans haven't been necessarily released on how they're going to do it. I know they're thinking about it, but it is a legitimate concern, and I think it's a great call. We have another caller coming in. Hello. You're on Sound Off. Hello? All right, we've got another caller. Hello, you're on Sound Off.
Yes. All right, Michael. All right. All right. So my worry is these kids are all going to be wearing masks. They say that, but do they really know how kids act when they wear masks? I mean, they're going to be flipping them around on their fingers, playing with them, and doing everything. And quite frankly, these children are always full of germs. So even when it's just cold and flu season, the staff and everyone else still gets sick, and it gets spread around. So I don't understand how any of this is going to change anything at all.
Yeah, I think it's I think that's one of the concerns. The plans seem predicated on the idea that people will wear masks, not only teachers but students, as often as they need to wear them, and as important as it is to wear them. But there are certainly cases where masks won't be worn in the classroom and things like that. But if we get to a point where masks aren't being worn, and I know one of the concerns that I hear from educators is the follow through. What kind of, in a sense, consequences are there going to be if somebody that refuses to wear a mask or whatever? I think these are legitimate questions that the schools are still working through and trying to figure out how to make sense of it. But as a teacher and as an educator, those who are teachers and educators and bus drivers and cafeteria workers, I think there's some concern to say, what happens if students don't wear their masks, and what happens if they're just playing with them instead of wearing them? Is it fair to ask a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old to wear a mask for a couple hours a day? I don't know. I know I have an 8 and a 10 and a 12-year-old, and they wear masks when we're out. When we do go out, the very rare chances we go out, and they do fine with it. So I don't think it's that they can't, but there's certainly, you're asking, I think it's a tall order for a lot of kids.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that they can't, or I'm saying they're not gonna. They're kids, man. Trying to control them,
Sure.
trying to keep them in their seat in the classroom
Sure.
alone in the same spot is really hard to do in the first place. So
Absolutely.
now we're talking about they got to be in the same spot all day in the classroom, and they can take their mask off. I mean, it's just not going to work.
So in your opinion, then, what would you do for school this fall?
I mean, honestly, we'll have to have stricter cleaning procedures. We're going to have to hire some more custodians, stuff like that. But to ask these kids to wear masks all day,
Sure.
it's a far cry from what's really going to happen. I really don't have a solid answer for the plan, and that's what really makes the situation so hard.
Yeah, I think, I think you kind of tapped into a fear that many people have, is that one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to have these policies, but there'll be very little follow through. And so, because the policies in themselves are very hard to follow through on. And so, and I think, again, with community spread, we've seen this. We have a school in South Bend that has a camp going on right now that just had some cases happen in there, and it does happen. And so, again, it's a lot of questions. I think it's going to take money to, like you've said, pay more people to clean, more cleaning supplies. None of that happens and is given to you that cheaply. And so you have to invest into these if we were serious about reopening, I think. Well, thank you so much for calling.
Yep, thank you. Have a good day.
So I was kind of perusing the internet on some of these things. And if you have a call, go ahead and call into 219-362-0522 or send us a text. But I was reading the internet on some of these things, which really makes me sound like an expert, right? Reading the internet. But I wanted to see kind of what some of the major education agencies in Indiana were saying. And so the Indiana State Teachers Association has 10 requests that they're making essentially of school systems. And I thought we'd go through those. If you have an opinion on those, give us a call, let us know. But the top 10 requests from the Indiana State Teachers Association for reopening in the fall, and it says on June 15th, President Keith Gamble, the ISTA president, submitted the concerns and requests of educators across the state on school reentry via a letter for Governor Eric Holcomb's consideration. And here are the top 10 requests. The first one is by the Indiana State Teachers Association: address the needs of medically vulnerable students and school employees. So they want each plan for school system to address the needs of medically vulnerable students and school employees. Obviously, this is one of the concerns. I think Michigan City area schools employs 1,000 people, full-time equivalent, over 1,000. and what happens to the employees that have issues, medical issues. What happens if they're high risk? These kind of things. How are they protected? How are the teachers protected? These kind of things. What about the students that maybe have? I know of a student locally who has cerebral palsy. What happens to them? They cannot get sick. What kind of plans are in place for those who are on the outside, perhaps, of normal medical behavior? These kind of things. Secondly, eliminate or reduce standardized testing during the 2020-2021 school. Thirdly, promote local discussion and bargaining. Fourthly, offer consistent access to protective equipment. I think that's a very legitimate concern and request, to make sure that nobody has to go far or look hard to get medical equipment in their schools. Fifthly, provide clarity around when schools should close and or reopen due to COVID-19 spikes. And if I'm being honest with you right now, this is the question that I have, is I'm not quite sure what that paradigm looks like. How do you know when we move from a green to a yellow to a red? I'm not quite sure. I haven't heard that really articulated well yet. Sixthly, issue waiver days when schools need to close. Obviously, one of the state's rules is schools have to be in session a certain amount of time, or a certain amount of days a year, but also schools need to have a certain amount of an attendance metric in their schools, 80% in their schools, or it doesn't count as an official day. Seventhly, get staff and students home when they feel sick. Eighthly, maintain important educator rights. Ninth, safeguard important programs for students. And 10th, encourage our congressional delegation to provide federal relief to our public schools. So those are our 10 from the ISTA. We got a couple more callers. I'd love to take your calls today. Call into the Liquor Vault on-air line at 219-362-0522, or you can text us. Hello, welcome to Sound Off.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Good. How about you?
I'm doing okay. It's a beautiful day in LaPorte.
Awesome. Hey, now I got a 2.5, 7, and a 10-year-old grandkid, and we went to the stores, and when we go, the 7 and the 10 are fine, but the 2.5, the mask falls down, or he gets tired of it, and if he's looking at something, they'll put it in his pocket or give it to me, to put it back on. But what's going to happen to the older kids whose parents and that are rebellious against this, and they're going to say, my dad or my mom says I don't have to wear these, and then so are they going to kick them out of school, because I think they're going to have, there's a lot of people that want to rebel against it for whatever reason they have, but which is silly, But what are they going to do with people like that that's going to say I'm not going to wear that mask?
Yeah,
that's my question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a legitimate question. I think it's one that the educators and the administrators need to deal with, is what is the follow-through? What again are the consequences of not following the guidelines? What happens when students refuse to wear a mask, or what happens when a parent tells the kid that they don't need to follow the guidelines that the school set up? And I think it's a real question. And honestly, I don't know what they can say, the schools right now, until they get into it. But I think it is certainly something that they're going to have to deal with. Well, thanks so much for calling. Hello, you're on Sound Off.
Well, I'm sitting here reading from the World Meter. It's worldmeter.info, which is a age, sex, and existing condition COVID cases statistics. Now, this is taken from the New York City Health Department as of May 13th. 0 to 17-year-old children, if you want to call a 17-year-old child, 0 to 17-year-olds, there's been 3 deaths from COVID-19 without underlying conditions and 6 with underlying conditions. So, I mean, I believe this is obviously a real virus. It's probably a perpetual, or it's a threat to those 50 and above. I think that, things should be put in place, but I think overthinking it might be, I get a little nervous about people freaking out over this thing. I mean, you're not having children dying by a mass swarm because of this virus, and it isn't because they haven't been around it. Children are resilient. They come through it, and kids die every year from, a lot of things other than just COVID. So I just the statistics out there, because even at 18 to 44 years old, this is in New York, you've had 17 people die, you've had 17 people die without underlying conditions, and out of the 600 deaths, 476 of them had underlying conditions. So this is going to be interesting to see how they move on this, but I don't want people freaking out. I mean, the numbers don't lie. We can talk all we want about coronavirus, but statistics are what they are, and we've seen this now for months, so it's not something new. Okay. So, I mean, saying kids can't go to, having issues in school is, we just don't want to overstep boundaries. I mean, kids are going to get it, and they'll get it, and of the 9 who caught it, 3 had some serious issues as of May, and that's since we've learned a lot more about it. So,
well, thanks for calling.
It'll be interesting to see how it goes. Thanks
for calling. I think real quick on some of that too. There's a lot we don't know about kids, and Dr. Fauci has said a lot of we don't know about kids, and but we do know that they do contract it at a lesser rate. We're not sure if it's because we did our school closings and they're just not around as much. And so they're not contracting it at higher rates as adults are because they're not, at work. They're mostly at home. I think the fear, though, again, isn't just that kids get it. It's that the adults in the building will get it, and that the kids might get it and bring it home to their parents and grandparents. And again, I think you're right in that. I think we do need to look at the data, and the data does suggest we need to, deal with the actual truth and not get too hysterical about it. But I think it is kind of hard to make sense of some of it when a lot of it's changing, especially since May. Real quick, we got a couple texts that came in. One of the texts is, what happens if a member of a student's family contracts COVID? Does the student and his or her classmates they had contact with need to quarantine? It's a great question. Second one, for mask wearing, offer the kids extra credit points for wearing a mask. That's an interesting idea. Well, we're going to take a break. Thank you so much for calling in. This is Sound Off. If you have a question, do call in or text our the Liquor Vault on-air line at 219-362-0522. Thanks for listening. Welcome back. It is a beautiful day outside. Thank you so much for listening to Sound Off. We have a couple callers and some texts coming in. Here's one text before we get to our next caller. I heard that the Penn school students were going to stay in one classroom and the teachers were going to rotate. Have lunch in your classroom as well. That's an interesting idea there. So we have a caller on our line. Hello, you're on Sound Off. How are you?
Well, good. How you doing today?
It's beautiful outside. I'm happy. I'm healthy. I'm doing well.
Yeah, it's not so hot and humid.
Yeah, that's right.
It is very, very pleasant today.
Yep.
I have a lot of concerns, not personally, because my kids. I just recently lost my youngest son, and
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you knew him too.
Did I?
Jeremy Reed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm really sorry about your loss.
Yeah, it's been hard. I'll tell you. Parents shouldn't be burying their children. That's just
Amen. I agree.
Contrary to what we come into this world believing. But anyhow, what I called about. Nowadays, a lot of grandparents are the custodians of their grandkids. So you have multi-generational homes, and the grandparents are susceptible more so than the smaller kids. And now they're finding that smaller kids are less susceptible than those in their teens, and that brings about a concern too. But I don't know. What are they going to do if opening the school becomes a super spreader type phenomenon? What do they do then? Just shut back down again, or what?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and one that I think is on many people's minds is kind of what are the metrics or the paradigm that they're using to figure out whether or not it's good to have full days, or we need to have a half week, or the schools need to shut down completely. I'm working on hopefully getting an interview or a sound off with our local health department, because it seems like many of the schools are going to be using the health department to have these kind of conversations with. And I'd like to figure out some of of those metrics and some of those equations on what they're going to be looking at. And honestly, most of the plans that I've read through don't say. They don't have a particular metric in mind to say it's increasing cases or it's deaths or we're going to look at just individual schools. There's not a lot of guidance there yet. So I think it's a lot of good questions.
Another thing I wanted to bring up, you can have a child with an underlying medical condition that you may not even know about. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we lost a football player right here in LaPorte. So there's something else that would be a concern if I was a parent right now and sending my kids back to school.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for calling, and I'm really sorry about your loss.
Thank you so much, Pastor. Appreciate it.
No problem. All right, we've got another caller here. Hello, welcome to Sound Off. Hello?
Hello, is that me?
This is. Who is this?
Okay, my concern about sending kids back to school, that new school that they just built is so crowded. Why don't they take some of the younger kids and put them back into Boston High School or junior high school, whatever they call it now, or what it used to be Boston.
Sure.
Put some of them younger kids, like the 5th, 6th, or 7th grade kids back into Boston. That would kind of take some of the congestion out of the new school. That is my thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for calling. That's actually an interesting idea. I'd never thought about that, is using some of the space that is empty right now. I don't know what shape Boston School is in right now. I have no idea. I haven't been in there, and I don't even know if it's ready for students to get into. But, one of the more kind of pressing issues, though, is, again, if that would happen, it takes money. And I'm not sure how the school systems are doing on getting state granting or federal funds to make sure that they're able to do all of these things. I know in our organization, we've spent a decent amount of money just on sanitizer and masks and things like this. It's a real cost with that has to come from a line item. And, again, it's one of the things that schools have to be concerned about. And no, we do have a text that just came in. How can you make kids wear masks on the bus when you have 3 kids per seat in an aisle? It's a great question, one that I've asked. My daughter is a student here in LaPorte in the middle school and comes home, and she often tells me she sits 3 to 4 to a seat, and she'll also say that her friend has a tuba and she has a violin. So it is a crowded seat, I know, and I'm not real sure. I do know that many people are planning to not use buses this year with their schools. They're going to be picking up and dropping off more than usual even. So I hope that the schools are figuring out better processes for that as well. We've got another caller. Hello, welcome to Sound Off. How are you? Hello?
Is that me?
Yeah, that's you, buddy. How are you?
Okay, your next guest you should try to get on is the LaPorte County Health Director.
I'm working on it. I am working on it. I have a request.
He's the one should have all the input on what's going on. A doctor, what's his name? The commissioner, Vigila Cora.
Dr. Cora. Yep.
Yeah, very informative. But you ought to get the health director and see what he has to say about all this. You know what?
Yeah, it's absolutely what we're trying to work on is get them on, because again, even just talking to Dr. Barbara Easton-Watkins, which I really enjoyed that conversation. So grateful she came on air with me. But one of the things that we were talking about is, how will you determine, when this is unsafe or not? And the answer essentially was, we're going to let the health department do that. And it'll be in coordination with the schools, obviously. The health department won't make it unilaterally, but it's a lot of authority to the health department. And I'm not sure, what that looks like. And so to know, I think we need to make sure that we're having, conversations in the media and locally also with the other stakeholders that are in this, like the health department. And then, on top of that, you also have the state who can also come and unilaterally say the schools are closed down. I know there are some states that are essentially having those challenges and making those decisions. There's the very real possibility as cases are going up locally that we might start in what is maybe a closed down state in our schools if our transmission rates don't get lower, and if they don't get those under control, and we're not doing what we need to do to get those. If you go to the LaPorte County government site, you can find the COVID numbers just for our county. If we don't get those under control, pretty soon we're going to figure that out. So I do want to thank you so much for calling. Thank you so much for being a part of Sound Off today. We're grateful for you. We hope you tune in this Friday. I have a city engineer from LaPorte, Indiana, Nick Minnick, as my guest. I hope you call back in. Stay listening. Thanks so much for calling. Have a great day.
Thank you for joining us and voicing your opinion on this edition of Sound Off. The views on Sound Off are those of the host or callers and do not represent the opinion of 96.7 The Eagle, Spoon River Media LLC, or the sponsors. Sound Off airs every Monday and Friday at 12:30. Please mark your calendar and join us again for the next edition of Sound Off on 96.7 The Eagle.
Thank you for listening to the Sound Off podcast on 967theeagle.com.